The first time I sat in the waiting room at Halverson Behavioral Health, I noticed the fish tank before anything else. It was built into the wall, wide and calm, glowing blue under soft lights, filled with slow-moving fish that looked like they had nowhere else to be. I remember thinking it was designed to make people breathe slower, to make them feel like nothing bad could happen in a place where water moved that gently. My name is Ilara Finch, and at the time, I believed I was there to save my marriage. I had been married to Jonah Finch for 11 years, long enough to memorize the way he rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring when he was nervous, long enough to know when his smile was real and when it was something he put on because someone was watching. Couples therapy had been his idea. That should have meant something. That should have meant hope. He told me he wanted to fight for us, that he didn't want to end up like his parents, quietly bitter, coexisting in the same house like strangers. When he said it, he looked me straight in the eye, voice low and sincere, and I believed him because I wanted to. That was my first mistake. The second was assuming that honesty meant the same thing to both of us. We met with Dr. Lillian Moore, a soft-spoken woman with silver-framed glasses and a habit of nodding slowly while people talked, as if she were physically absorbing their words. Jonah was attentive in sessions. He listened. He apologized. He talked about stress at work, about feeling disconnected, about wanting to rebuild trust. He took notes. He reached for my hand when things got emotional. If someone had filmed those sessions and shown them to strangers, they would have said he was trying. Outside of therapy, though, something felt off. He was more guarded with his phone. He started going out more often, claiming late meetings, networking events, spontaneous drinks with colleagues. When I asked questions, he didn't get angry. He got gentle, too gentle. He told me therapy was helping him realize he needed space to process, that healing wasn't linear. Dr. Moore echoed that sentiment in our sessions, reminding me to respect Jonah's boundaries while we worked on communication. I nodded and tried to be understanding, even when the distance between us felt like it was expanding instead of shrinking. 3 months into therapy, Jonah suggested we slow down on sessions. He said he felt overwhelmed, that maybe we should apply what we'd learned before continuing. Dr. Moore agreed it could be beneficial to take a short break. I was hesitant, but I didn't want to push him. We scheduled one more session, then agreed to pause for 6 weeks. Jonah hugged me in the parking lot afterward, told me he was proud of us. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders relaxed, phone already in his hand. That night, he didn't come home until after midnight. He said traffic was bad. I didn't argue. I went to bed alone. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It came in pieces, small enough to dismiss if I wasn't paying attention. A scent that wasn't his cologne. A smile at a text he wouldn't share. A weekend trip he said was for work, planned too suddenly to make sense. I told myself I was being paranoid, that therapy had made me hyper-aware, that trust required patience. Then, one afternoon, I ran into someone at the grocery store who didn't know she was about to change my life. Her name was Maribel Torres, and she recognized Jonah from a photo on my phone while I was paying. She was standing behind me in line, and when she leaned forward and said, "Is that Jonah?" I turned, surprised. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Do you know him?" She smiled, bright and easy. "I'm seeing him," she said. "We're actually in couples therapy together." The world didn't stop spinning. It tilted, just enough to make everything slide. "Couples therapy?" I repeated, my voice sounding far away. Maribel nodded, oblivious. "Yeah, we just started a couple months ago. He said he was divorced, though, or separated. I can't remember exactly. He's been through a lot." She said it kindly, sympathetically, like she was talking about someone she loved. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the counter. "That's interesting," I said. "Where do you go?" She told me the name without hesitation. Halverson Behavioral Health. Same fish tank, same calming blue light. I didn't confront her. I didn't confront him. I went home, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall until it got dark. When Jonah came home, I watched him move around the kitchen, humming softly, completely unaware that his carefully balanced world had cracked. I asked him how his day was. He kissed my cheek and said it was productive. I nodded and went to bed early. The next morning, I called Halverson Behavioral Health. My voice was steady when I spoke to the receptionist. I asked general questions, nothing suspicious. I confirmed my past appointments. I asked about billing. Then, casually, I asked how intake forms were handled for new couples. The receptionist explained that each couple filled out separate forms, that confidentiality was strict, but that all records were stored within the same system. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I just knew that the truth was sitting in a filing system somewhere, quietly waiting. Over the next week, I replayed every conversation Jonah and I had about therapy, every reassurance, every promise. I realized how carefully he'd kept his stories vague, how he'd never mentioned names, how he'd always framed himself as someone trying to heal. He wasn't juggling two relationships by accident, he was managing them deliberately. I emailed Dr. Moore and asked if we could schedule a follow-up session sooner than planned. She agreed. When Jonah found out, he hesitated, then smiled. "If that's what you need," he said. In that moment, I understood something important. He thought he was in control. That belief was about to undo him. When we sat back down in Dr. Moore's office, Jonah slipped into his familiar posture, one arm draped casually along the back of the couch, body angled slightly toward me in a way that suggested openness without fully committing to it. He smiled at Dr. Moore like he was relieved to be there, like this space validated him. I watched him carefully, noticing how practiced he looked, how easily he slipped into the role of the earnest husband trying his best. Dr. Moore asked why I'd wanted to resume sessions sooner than planned, and I felt Jonah's attention shift to me, a subtle tightening around his eyes. I didn't accuse him, not yet. I spoke about feeling unsettled, about sensing that there were things left unsaid between us, about wanting clarity. Jonah nodded along, chiming in with phrases that sounded rehearsed, talking about growth and communication and patience. Dr. Moore listened, scribbling notes, occasionally asking Jonah to expand on a thought. I let the session unfold, storing every word. When it ended, Jonah squeezed my hand and told me he was glad I'd spoken up. That night, he told me he was meeting a friend for drinks and would be late. I told him to be safe. 2 days later, I requested a copy of my intake forms from Halverson Behavioral Health, citing personal records. The practice had a policy allowing patients access to their own documentation. When the email arrived, it included not only my forms, but also a general explanation of how information was processed across the practice. One line stood out. It mentioned that relationship status discrepancies flagged within the system were escalated to the practice manager for review, especially in cases involving ethical conflicts. I read that sentence over and over. Jonah had listed himself as married on our intake forms. He had listed himself as single on Maribel's. The system would have noticed. It was only a matter of time. I didn't want to wait for time. I wanted intention. I asked Maribel if she wanted to get coffee. I framed it carefully, telling her I had something important to share and that it might be uncomfortable but deserved honesty. She agreed, curious more than cautious. We met at a small cafe near the river, sunlight reflecting off the water outside, everything feeling painfully normal. She looked nervous when I introduced myself fully, when I said Jonah was my husband, not his ex, not his past. Her face drained of color as I spoke, laying out facts without embellishment. I showed her a photo from our wedding, a recent one from my phone of Jonah in our kitchen, time-stamped from the previous night. She covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She told me he'd said I was unstable, that I couldn't accept the end of the marriage, that therapy was helping him set boundaries. Hearing my life reduced to a lie stung less than I expected. What surprised me was the relief I felt watching her realization mirror my own. She wasn't my enemy.
She was another person he'd decided to manipulate. Maribel told me about their therapy sessions. A different therapist, same building, same practice. Jonah had cried, she said, talked about guilt and fear, talked about wanting to do things right this time. I asked her if she'd be willing to come with me to an emergency meeting if the practice requested one. She didn't hesitate. She said she wanted the truth out as much as I did. We exchanged numbers.
When I walked back to my car, I felt steady in a way I hadn't since this all began. Not angry, focused. The call came the next morning. It was from Renata Klein, the practice manager at Halverson Behavioral Health. Her voice was professional but tight, like she was holding something back. She said there had been a serious ethical concern identified within their system involving overlapping relationships and misrepresentation.
She asked if I would be willing to attend an in-person meeting that afternoon. She also mentioned that another client would be present. She didn't say Maribel's name, but she didn't have to. I agreed. Then I called Jonah. I told him the practice had requested a meeting to discuss our therapy. He sounded annoyed, not alarmed. He said he was busy but could make it work. It's probably just paperwork, he said. They're always overcautious. I let him believe that.
The conference room at Halverson Behavioral Health was smaller than I expected. No fish tank, no calming blue light, just a long table, neutral walls, and a sense that this wasn't a space designed for comfort. Renata sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dr. Moore and another therapist I recognized from the website as Dr. Ethan Cole. Maribel sat across from me. Jonah arrived last, smiling as he walked in, then freezing when he saw her. The room went silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Renata began. She explained that the practice had identified a significant breach of trust and ethics involving Jonah's simultaneous participation in couples therapy with two different partners while misrepresenting his marital status. She spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the facts like items on a list. Jonah tried to interrupt, tried to explain, but she held up a hand. She said they would finish first. She presented copies as intake forms, dates, discrepancies, notes flagged by the system. She explained that while confidentiality between clients was paramount, the practice also had a duty to address situations that could cause harm. She looked at Jonah and asked if he had anything to add. He looked around the table, eyes darting, searching for an ally. There were none. He said he'd been confused. He said he was trying to figure things out. He said he never meant to hurt anyone. Maribel spoke then, her voice shaking but clear. She said she wouldn't have entered therapy with him if she'd known the truth. I spoke last. I said I came to therapy in good faith, believing my husband wanted to repair our marriage. I said the deception wasn't just personal, it undermined the integrity of the therapeutic process. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I stated facts. Renata told Jonah that the practice was terminating all therapeutic relationships involving him effective immediately. She said they would document the incident and that, if necessary, they would cooperate with any further ethical reviews. She offered resources for Maribel and me, separate referrals, apologies. Jonah sat there, shoulders slumped, face flushed. When the meeting ended, he tried to speak to me, to apologize, to explain. I stood up and said I had nothing left to discuss. Maribel stood with me. We walked out together. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. That evening, Jonah came home and packed a bag without a word. He left before midnight. I didn't stop him. I didn't ask where he was going. In the weeks that followed, the truth rippled outward. Friends asked questions. Some chose sides. Some disappeared. I stayed quiet. The story didn't need my voice anymore. The documentation existed. The meeting had happened. The lie had collapsed under its own weight. Months later, I sat in a different waiting room, in a different building, with different walls and no fish tank. I was alone this time. The therapist called my name and I stood up, feeling grounded in a way I hadn't before. I wasn't there to save a marriage. I was there to understand myself again, to rebuild trust where it belonged. Jonah faded into the background of my life, a cautionary chapter, not the defining one. I heard he tried to explain himself to anyone who would listen, that he framed it as a misunderstanding, as bad timing. It didn't matter. The truth had already been seen by the people who needed to see it, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen.
You've just stepped into her revenge side, where every wound finds its justice, and every silence ends with truth. If her story struck a chord, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Another secret waits in the next video. See how her revenge begins.